After completing the Frito Sleigh CAPTCHA challenge, if you go into the Student Union building, you'll see that a crate appears outside of the Sleigh shop. And if you go talk to Shinny up a tree, he'll tell you that he figured it all out and that he put the name of the perpetrator of the cybersecurity events at Elf University in this crate, which is locked by 10 locks. So if you click into it, you'll see what he said. I locked the crate with the villain's name inside. Can you get it out? And 10 locks here. So the first lock says, you don't need a clever riddle to open the console and scroll a little. Still a riddle. But if we open the developer tools and look at the console, we can see the key to this lock, 8-character alphanumeric. If you copy it and put it in, the lock button becomes, you can actually click it, and the first lock is undone, is opened. Some codes are hard to spy. Perhaps they'll show up on pulp with dye. It's a description for our second lock, or the riddle, rather. My first go round, I didn't know what that meant, so luckily there are hints. So if you click on it, it says most paper is made out of pulp, and I don't see how that I didn't see how that had anything to do with this, so I needed another hint, and we have another one. How can you view this page on paper? Well, you can print it, but we'll look at the other hint anyway. Emulate print media and print this page, or view a print preview. Well, that sounds about right, so we'll look at a print preview, and sure enough, there is a code for this lock. We don't even need to print it. We can just paste it in, and we have our second lock. For our third lock, the riddle says, this code is still unknown. It was fetched, but never shown. That sounds to me like, there was a request, and it's just not rendered on the page, but we'll look at the hint. It says, Google your browser name view network. Well, we already have our developer tools open, so we'll just go over to the network tab, make sure that we have all selected to view all the requests. And we can see there are a couple of requests here. They are the same image that was fetched. And it's a PNG, so we can't copy and paste the code out, so we'll type it in manually. And it doesn't matter if you type in lowercase or uppercase, it'll still take the code. And sure enough, there it is. For our next lock, the riddle reads, where might we keep the things we forage? Yes, of course, local barrels. Well, local storage rhymes a little better, and I think that's where they were going with that. But we'll look at the hint anyway. And the hint says, Google your browser's name, view local storage. Well, we already have our developer tools open, so we can just go to the application tab in Chrome and local storage here. We can look and we see that there's a key with the name of, the Unicode character for 3 barrels, and there's a value as well. We can just copy that out, paste it in, and that's our lock. On to the next one. Did you notice the code in the title? It may very well prove vital. Well, you can hover over the Chrome tab down here, and it'll show that there's a code there in the title. But since I'm lazy, we can just view the page source and grab it out of the HTML title element. And here it is, crack the crate. You can see that's the tab title, and there's a bunch of spaces so that it's not immediately shown. but you can just copy it and paste it in. And there's our next lock. This next riddle. In order for this hologram to be effective, it may be necessary to increase your perspective. Now, I know that perspective is a CSS um, thing, but we can look at the hint anyway. And sure enough, perspective is a CSS property. So I'm going to go ahead and inspect this. It'll jump back to our elements tab, and it'll go straight to the div for hologram with the class hologram. We can see there are some items in it. They're not in order, so if you try to just put the content, the inner HTML or the text of the div in order, you'll notice it doesn't work. You'll get a failure and the lock will not open. So we'll have to actually solve it their way. So I'm going to go back to the div with class hologram, and we see that it does have a CSS property called perspective. It told us to increase it, so we're going to just edit it here, change it from 15 pixels to something like 6,000, just to get a nice big number. And we can see that it changes it shifts the characters into the correct order. And we'll try that. And our lock unlocks. Now, one thing that I noticed when I was solving this is that you can actually decode the hologram without having to do that, but more on that later. For our next lock, the font you're seeing is pretty slick, but this lock's code was my first pick. Now, we've already kind of moved into CSS with our last lock, so it seems pretty evident that that's the direction we need to go, but we'll look at the hint anyway. In the font family CSS property, you can list multiple fonts, and the first available font on the system will be used. Yep. So probably an easier way to do this is to just look at the source, and you can either pull down the CSS style sheet here, or you can see, there's inline CSS here. There's a style tag for inlining it in the page, and there's a font family that looks just like the other codes for the locks. 8-character alphanumeric, it's all caps, or it's printed in all caps. But as I mentioned, you don't have to. You can put it in lowercase and it'll still accept it. And there's our next lock. For our next one, the riddle says, in the event that the .eggs go bad, you must figure out who will be sad. And I didn't pick up on that one immediately, so we'll look at the hint. Google your browser's name, view event handlers. So we'll go ahead and inspect that just to bring it into focus in the DOM tree. And if you want to look at the event handlers, you can just go to the event listeners tab here. And we see that there's one called spoil, and that looks pretty promising. So if you expand it, you'll see that there's a handler where Veronica equals sad. So Veronica, it's a name, but it does have the same format as our other keys. And if we type it in, that's the code for this lock. For the next one, the next code will be unredacted, but only when all the chakras are active. And we see there's a colon before active. That's another CSS thing. So if we go over here and Control F in the developer tools, it'll bring up a box where you can search the source for what you're looking for. So it mentioned chakras, so we'll search for that. And sure enough, there are some elements of class chakra. And if in the Chrome developer tools, at least, if you right click, you can force a state of active. And when you do that, we can see that part of our key appears as Z and a W. So we'll just go ahead and repeat that with all of the other ones. And we can see that more of our key is showing up. And there's our key. Now, rather than jumping across straight left to right, we're just going to go, you know, ZWHQ, because that's the actual key. And we'll unlock our key, our lock. So if you, yep, if you wanted, you could explore, if you're curious, you can explore a little more by looking at the page source, opening the style sheet, which, as you can see, it's specified. It's specific to this instance of the page load with the seed that is generated from here. And we can open it. We can look for chakra. We can see that the child elements, where it's saying once it's set to active, what to specify as the contents. So there we can actually see our key in the CSS. And sure enough, that's it. It's right in order. And for our last lock, it says, "Oh no, this lock's out of commission. Pop off the cover and locate what's missing." And I tried to drag the cover off, but it doesn't really work that way. So we'll look at the hint, get a little more information. It says, "Use the DOM tree viewer to examine this lock. You can search for items in the DOM using this view." And DOM, being document object model. So just to get on our way, we'll inspect this particular element just to bring it in focus in the DOM tree. We're already there with our developer tools open. And we can see that this lock is a little bit different than the others. For reference, we can look at the prior lock, lock C9. We're on lock C10 right now. We can see it has an input type. It tells you the max length of 8. That's the key size generally. Data ID, which is 9, probably used for submission in the post request. And we can see that our lock button is disabled because we already opened it, and the different indicators here. Lock 10 is different because it has this extra div called cover. And if you expand it, you can see there's a little more to it. But since it says pop off the cover, we're actually gonna right click and we can just hide the element in Chrome without deleting it. And we can see there's a circuit board underneath. We'll look at the other hints just to see where it takes us. You can click and drag elements to reposition them in the DOM tree. That's handy information to know if you didn't know it already. You can select something like this, and you can actually drag it around, and it'll update the DOM to reflect that. Look at the other hints. If an action doesn't produce the desired effect, check the console for error output. It seems like a pretty good rule of thumb anyway. Be sure to examine the printed circuit board. And that's our last hint, really on the nose. So we'll zoom in a little bit and look at that circuit board. We can see there are spots where something is missing. You can see the circuitry is got a spot there where something should go. And we actually can see that there's something printed here that looks, consistent with the format of the previous keys. So if we type that in, can see that it highlighted over here that you could actually use the button now. But when we try, we get an error in the console saying missing macaroni. And when you look at the circuit board, you can kind of see that this one looks like the shape of a macaroni noodle. So earlier we searched for chakras, but this time we're going to search for macaroni. We can see that there's a div with the class component macaroni, and it has a data code. It's probably specific. And referencing the prior hints, it says you can drag DOM elements. So we're going to drag this down to lock C10. And we're going to leave it in there. And when you do, you can see that macaroni appears here. And it fills in the missing spot. So it looks like we have 2 more to find. And, if you're looking at this for the first time, those might not be really apparent what those images are. But if you try to submit the correct key again, it'll give us a new message in the console, an error message that says missing cotton swab. So we'll search the DOM for that element again. And sure enough, there's another div with class component swab. Seems kind of similar to the other HTML element. We'll drag that one in too. And sure enough, it appears here. So I have no idea what the shape could be, first time looking at this, if it is your first time. But you submit and you get another message, which is pretty helpful. It says missing gnome. So that seems like our last DOM element we're looking for. We can drag that down. We'll put that with our other components. And we can see it's all filled in now. And if you click the submit button, it did unlock, and you're greeted with this. So here's the note from Shinny Uppatry. The villain is the Tooth Fairy. It tells you how fast you solved it, and your rank is casual. That doesn't sound like a very good rank. If you look in the console, you can see that the console was cleared and new messages are here. The password is the Tooth Fairy. It tells you how long you took in seconds. It says, well done. Do you have what it takes to crack the crate in under 3 minutes? Feel free to use this handy image to share your score. Doesn't seem like a very good score since they want us to crack it in under 3 minutes. We're challenged. And so with that in mind, I actually wrote a Python script to automate this, to grab this stuff and basically do all of this so I don't have to do it by hand. So here's my script. And when you run it, it'll actually dump out the JSON for you. So you can see the reward is the Tooth Fairy, duration 1.457 seconds, position, I'm guessing it actually ranks everyone, or it ranks based on the seed. So to get a little bit into that, I'll pull up another, here we go, another instance of that. When you look at the source, I mentioned earlier that style sheet is specific with the seed of this page load. It's generated by the JavaScript. And that's the seed. And each time that you load this challenge, that's using our first key is kind of to demonstrate. This is different from the key last time that we did. And if you load the page again, it's different again. And if you look at the source again, the seed is different as well. So the challenge is dynamically generated based on the seed. and the keys will be different each time. And the JavaScript, as you can see, is also specific using the same seed. If you look at it, it's heavily obfuscated. Yeah, so they use some kind of packer. I actually went through and tried to uh, decode this, and I didn't get it back into plain text, but I can kind of see where they were going with it. This is hex encoded, and then from there it's base 64 encoded, and a bunch of keywords are that this is just an array of keywords that will be used in the rest of the script. All of the functions and everything are hex encoded for the most part. But what my Python script does is it goes through, it finds the keys in the CSS and the JavaScript, and it gathers them without having to actually do everything by hand, and then it submits it. And it's a lot faster, so 1.457 seconds is pretty good. It's definitely under that 3-minute mark. And it gives you it gives you the path to the image once you solve it. So you can actually just paste it here. You can see the solve. And that's it.